During a lavish party, a pregnant woman falls 5 stories, and the question is whether she slipped or was pushed. While the elite try to cover up the scandal, recordings and witnesses begin to reveal a truth that's impossible to control. And when she survives and speaks, what seemed like an accident becomes the fall of an empire. If you like stories like this, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel, and leave a comment telling us where you're listening from. The lights of the 30th floor penthouse at the Imperial, in the heart of Manhattan's Upper East Side, glittered like stars trapped in Murano crystal. The Christmas party, hosted by Richard Montgomery, wasn't just a celebration, it was a declaration of power. Every detail had been meticulously planned to impress the more than 200 guests circulating through the 5 floors of the most coveted property in the city. The jazz quartet performed American standards with surgical precision, while white-gloved waiters glided among the attendees, offering French champagne in baccarat crystal flutes. Marina Hayes Montgomery watched it all with tired eyes. At 32, she carried in her 7-month belly the heir everyone expected, but whom she already loved with an intensity that frightened her. Dressed in an elegant emerald green silk gown, her brown hair swept into a sophisticated bun, she played the perfect role of the wife of the country's most successful real estate developer. But behind the rehearsed smile and the jewels adorning her neck was a woman who had long since lost herself. She moved among the guests with the grace that years of navigating high society had taught her. She greeted politicians' wives, hugged executives, and smiled for the society column photographers. Every gesture was calculated, every word measured. Richard demanded perfection, and she had learned, at the cost of her own essence, to deliver exactly that. Mrs. Helen Peterson, a woman with silver hair and a sharp gaze who had known Marina since childhood, approached her with a glass of sparkling water. She was the mother of Marina's best friend from high school, one of the few people there who knew her before she became Mrs. Montgomery. "You look pale, dear," Mrs. Peterson whispered, touching her arm with motherly affection. "You should be resting, not playing hostess at this party." Marina forced another smile. "I'm fine, Mrs. Peterson. The baby's just a little active today, that's all." The older woman narrowed her eyes, clearly unconvinced. She knew that empty look, that exhaustion that went beyond the physical. She had seen it in other women, in other marriages that shone on the outside while rotting from within. Across the main hall, Richard Montgomery radiated charisma. Tall, dark-haired, with a smile that could sell anything to anyone, he was the gravitational center of the party. Businessmen vied for his attention, politicians sought his support, and women admired him with poorly disguised lust. At 45, he had built a real estate development empire that rivaled the country's greatest fortunes. He was feared, respected, and above all, envied. Beside him, like an elegant shadow, stood Beatrice Foster. As the director of communications for his companies, she was the woman everyone knew was always around, but whose exact role no one dared question aloud. Blonde, slender, with blue eyes that calculated every move around her, Beatrice was Richard's confidant, his closest advisor, his ally in every corporate battle. And, some whispered, perhaps something more. Marina felt Beatrice's gaze on her and looked away. There was an old tension between them, made of jealousy, resentment, and words never spoken. Beatrice had known. Richard, before her, had worked alongside him for over a decade, and Marina had always known the other woman saw her as an intruder, a decorative piece that had taken a place she believed was hers by right. The music shifted to a slower jazz number, and couples began to move closer to dance. Marina took the opportunity to slip away toward the balcony. She needed air, silence, a moment away from the stage where she was forced to perform every night. The 5th-floor balcony offered a breathtaking view of the city. The skyscrapers of New York glittered like candles on a giant birthday cake, and the crisp December night air brought some relief to her tired body. Marina rested her hands on her belly, feeling the baby move, and for the first time that night, she allowed herself a moment of genuine peace. Her son would be different, she promised herself. He would know true love, freedom, the chance to be whoever he wanted to be. She would make sure of it, even if it was the last thing she did. The sound of footsteps made her turn. Richard was approaching with that smile she knew so well. The one he wore in public, before revealing what he really thought in private. "There you are, my love," he said, his voice as smooth as velvet. "I was worried. Some of the guests were asking for you." "I just needed some air," Marina replied, keeping her voice neutral. "The baby is restless." Richard stood beside her, looking out at the city. For a moment, he seemed genuinely concerned. He touched her face gently, brushing away a strand of hair that had escaped her bun. "You look beautiful tonight," he murmured. "The most beautiful woman at the party." Marina felt a chill, and it wasn't from the cold. She knew this prelude, this calculated kindness that always preceded something worse. "Thank you, Richard." He continued to caress her face, but his eyes had changed. The softness gave way to something harder, colder. "So, explain to me, please, why you made a point of humiliating me and yourself by talking for 20 minutes with that meddling old woman." Marina swallowed hard. "Mrs. Peterson. She's been a friend of my family for decades, Richard. It was just a polite conversation." "Polite," he repeated, his voice gaining a sharp edge. "Do you know what people think when they see the host's wife whispering with a woman who makes no secret of her contempt for me? She doesn't despise you, She what, Marina?" Richard interrupted, moving closer. The pressure of his hand on her arm increased subtly. "She just fills your head with ideas, makes you question your life, your marriage, your choices." Marina felt the familiar fear settle in her chest. "It's nothing like that. Please, Richard, let's not argue here. The guests might see." That was the wrong thing to say. His face twisted into a mask of controlled rage. "Now you're worried about the guests? Interesting. You didn't seem worried when you were ignoring me to chat with your little senior citizen friend." "I wasn't ignoring you. You never are you?" His voice was a venomous whisper now. "You never do anything wrong. It's always a misunderstanding, always a coincidence. 7 years of marriage and you still treat me like I'm paranoid." Marina felt tears burn her eyes, but refused to let them fall. She had learned that crying only made things worse. "Please, let's go back to the party. We can talk later at home." Richard let out a bitter laugh. "Talk, right, as if you ever really talked to me." He turned, seemingly ready to leave, but then he stopped. Something had caught his attention through the glass doors leading back inside. His body went rigid, and when he turned back to Marina, his eyes were burning with a fury she had rarely seen. "He's here," Richard said through gritted teeth. "Gabriel Anderson is at my party." Marina felt her blood run cold. Gabriel, the name she didn't dare speak, the ghost of a life that could have been. The man she had loved before Richard entered her, life with his promises and his relentless determination. "I didn't know," she said quickly. "I swear I didn't know, Richard." "You didn't know. He's your ex-fiancé, Marina, the man you almost married before you met me. And you want me to believe you didn't know he was coming to my Christmas party?" "I didn't invite him," she insisted, panic rising in her voice. "Why would I do that?" Richard moved closer to her again, and this time there was no pretense of kindness. "Maybe because you've never forgotten him. Maybe because you still hold on to that pathetic fantasy that he's going to show up and rescue you like some fairy tale prince. That's not true. Don't lie to me." His voice rose dangerously, and Marina glanced nervously at the doors, afraid someone might hear. "You think I don't know? You think I don't see how distant you get, how you shut down, how you clearly wish you were anywhere but by my side?" Marina backed away instinctively, her back hitting the balcony railing. "Richard, please, think about the baby. Think about us." Something flickered in his eyes at the mention of the baby, a momentary hesitation that vanished as quickly as it appeared. "The baby," he repeated, "my son. The only reason I still tolerate your little rebellions, your pathetic attempts to defy me." "He's our son," Marina said, a spark of courage shining through her fear. "And he deserves to grow up in a home where he doesn't have to be afraid of his own father." The words were out before she could stop them, and she immediately knew she had made a mistake. Richard's face transformed, the civilized mask finally falling away completely. "Afraid?" His voice was pure ice now. "You think our son should be afraid of Me? You think I'm some kind of monster? I didn't say that. You did, you just did. He advanced and she retreated further, feeling the cold metal of the railing against her back. You just said exactly that. In my own home, at my own party. You accuse me of being someone my own son should be afraid of. Richard, please what? He was so close now she could feel his hot breath on her face. Please let you continue to humiliate me. Please let you dream about your ex-fiancé while you sleep next to me. Please let you turn my son against me before he's even born. Marina felt the tears finally escape, tracing hot paths down her cold cheeks. I just want peace, Richard. I just want our son to have a normal life. Normal. He spat the word out as if it were poison. You want normal? Look around you, Marina. This is what I've built for you, for us. And all you do is complain, hide away, wish you were somewhere else. Inside the penthouse, the party continued in full swing, oblivious to the drama unfolding on the balcony. The jazz quartet played a smooth melody, couples danced. Champagne flowed. No one noticed the pregnant woman cornered by her own husband. No one saw the fear in her eyes or the tears on her face. No one, except for one person. Across the room, Gabriel Anderson was watching through the glass doors. He had been reluctant to accept the invitation to this party, knowing Marina would be there, knowing that seeing her again would reopen wounds he had spent years trying to heal. But the host, an important business client, had insisted and he had finally given in. Now, seeing the scene unfolding on the balcony, he felt something stir in his chest, something he thought he had buried along with the engagement ring Marina had returned 7 years ago. The party went on, the hours passed, and in the shadows of the balcony, a confrontation was nearing its breaking point. The December air carried the promise of a storm, and on this night more than just presents would be exchanged. Secrets would be revealed, masks would fall, and the lives of everyone present would never be the same. Gabriel Anderson was not a man who hesitated. At 40, he had built a tech empire. That placed him among the most successful entrepreneurs in the country. He made decisions that moved billions. With the same ease he chose his breakfast. But in that moment, watching Marina through the glass doors, he felt paralyzed by a storm of emotions he thought he had overcome long ago. She looked different, thinner, despite the obvious pregnancy. There was something in her shoulders, a tension that didn't match the vibrant, full-of-life woman he had known. And there was fear in her eyes. Gabriel recognized that look because he had seen it before, in other contexts, on other women trapped, in situations they couldn't escape. He took a step toward the balcony doors, but was intercepted by Beatrice Foster, who appeared seemingly out of nowhere with 2 glasses of whiskey in her hands. Gabriel Anderson, what a wonderful surprise, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I didn't know you were a friend of Richard's. Gabriel accepted the glass more out of politeness than desire. I'm not. Mrs. Wallace insisted I come. Business matters. Ah, of course. Beatrice tilted her head, studying him with those calculating blue eyes. Mrs. Wallace is an important client for all of us, isn't she? There was something in her tone, a veiled insinuation that Gabriel couldn't immediately decipher. He tried to look toward the balcony again, but Beatrice positioned herself to block his view. Richard and Marina are having a private moment, she said, as if reading his mind. You know how it is with couples in love, especially with a baby on the way. The phrase "in love" sounded false to Gabriel's ears, but he kept his expression neutral. Of course. I don't intend to interrupt. Good. Beatrice took a sip of her whiskey, never taking her eyes off him. Because it would be very uncomfortable for everyone if old stories were to surface on such a beautiful night, don't you think? Gabriel felt a muscle in his jaw tighten. I don't know what you're talking about. You don't? She smiled, but there was something predatory in it. Marina didn't tell you? You two were engaged, weren't you? A long time ago, of course, before she met the right man for her. The provocation was blatant, and Gabriel refused to take the bait. Marina made her choices. I respected them then, and I respect them now. How mature of you. Beatrice moved a little closer, lowering her voice. I just hope you continue to be respectful. Richard may seem easygoing, but he doesn't like it when people try to interfere with what's his. The way she said, "What's his?" made Gabriel's stomach turn. Marina wasn't a possession, not an object to be claimed, but he swallowed his reply, knowing this was neither the time nor the place. Meanwhile, on the balcony, the situation between Richard and Marina had escalated to a dangerous level. He was so close to her now that their bodies almost touched, and the balcony railing was the only thing keeping Marina from backing up any further. "You are going to go back inside with me now," Richard said in a tone that brooked no argument. "You will smile, you will be charming, and you will pretend that we are the perfect couple everyone believes we are. Understood?" Marina closed her eyes for a moment, gathering a strength she wasn't sure she still possessed. "And what if I don't want to?" The question came out in a whisper, but its impact was like a thunderclap. Richard was silent for a long moment, so long that Marina opened her eyes to see his reaction. "What did you say?" His voice was dangerously low now. "I said—" Marina took a deep breath, feeling a desperate courage take hold. "I said, what if I don't want to pretend anymore, Richard? What if I'm tired of living this lie?" "You're delusional. The pregnancy is affecting your judgment." "No." Marina felt the tears stream down again, but this time she didn't care. "For the first time in years, I'm seeing things clearly. This isn't a marriage, Richard, it's a prison." He recoiled as if she had slapped him. "A prison? You live in a multi-million-dollar penthouse, you wear jewelry that would cost more than most people make in a lifetime, and you call this a prison?" "Money isn't freedom, Richard." Marina hugged her own belly, as if protecting the baby from the coming storm. "I would trade all of this for a simple life where I could just be myself." "Yourself?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "And who are you, Marina? Do you think you'd be anything without me? You were a university professor making peanuts when we met. I gave you the world." "You gave me a gilded cage," she corrected, feeling the old Marina, the woman she was before her marriage, finally awaken. "And I was foolish enough to believe it was paradise." Richard advanced again, and this time Marina had nowhere to go. Her back was pressed against the railing, and she could feel the cold metal through the thin silk of her dress. "You're not leaving me," he said, the words escaping like a promise or a threat. "You will never leave me, Marina, not while you're carrying my son." "Our son," she repeated, "and he deserves more than a mother who is afraid of her own husband." Something broke in Richard's eyes at that moment. The civilized facade, the carefully cultivated charm, it all crumbled in the face of that truth spoken aloud. "Afraid? You're afraid of me?" He grabbed her arms forcefully. "I'll give you a reason to be afraid." Marina tried to pull away, panic seizing her body. "Richard, you're hurting me. Please, think of the baby. The baby. Always the baby." He shook her, and Marina felt her head spin. "What about me? What about what I want? Did you ever think about that?" Inside the party, someone finally noticed. Chloe Sanders, a 25-year-old journalist covering social events for a gossip magazine, had stepped away to find a quiet place to check her messages when she saw the scene through the glass. Her eyes widened, and she immediately started recording with her phone, her professional instincts overriding all other considerations. Across the room, Gabriel finally managed to break away from Beatrice, who had been summoned by one of Richard's executives. He looked toward the balcony again, and his blood ran cold. He could see Richard holding Marina, could see her trying to break free, could see the desperation in every line of her body. He started walking, then running, ignoring the surprised looks of the guests who moved out of his way. On the balcony, the confrontation reached its climax. Marina had managed to free one of her arms and pushed Richard with all her might. Surprised by the move, he stumbled back, letting her go. For a split second, Marina felt relief. She was free. She could run, she could call for help, she could finally escape. But then Richard lunged forward again, furious at being defied. He reached out his hands. It was unclear whether to grab her or push her, and Marina recoiled instinctively. What happened next lasted only seconds, but to everyone who saw it, it felt like an eternity. Marina felt her back hit the railing hard. The wrought iron structure, designed more for aesthetics than for safety, groaned under her weight. She tried to grab onto something, anything, but her hands found only air. The last thing she saw before she fell was Richard's face, a mixture of horror and something she couldn't identify. Shock, regret, or something more sinister? Marina's scream echoed through the New York night as her body plummeted from the 5th floor of the penthouse. Inside the party, the jazz quartet played on for a few more seconds, oblivious to the drama unfolding outside. Then, the screaming began. Gabriel reached the balcony just in time to see Marina disappear over the railing. For a terrible moment he froze, unable to process what his eyes were telling him. Then a deeper instinct took over. He sprinted for the stairs, taking them 3 at a time, pushing past anyone in his way. His heart hammered in his chest, and his mind refused to accept the possibility that she could be... No, he refused to complete the thought. When he finally reached the ground floor and ran out of the building, he found a scene of chaos. Guests crowded at the windows, security guards running back and forth, the distant sound of approaching sirens. And there, on the dented hood of a black luxury sedan, lay Marina, motionless. Gabriel ran to her, ignoring the warning shouts of the security guards. When he got close enough to see, his heart stopped for a moment. She was alive, breathing shallowly, her face covered in blood from a cut on her forehead. But she was alive. And, miraculously, her hands were still protectively cradling her belly. "Marina," he called softly, touching her face with trembling fingers. "Marina, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused from the pain and shock. For a moment, she didn't seem to recognize him. Then a flicker of awareness crossed her gaze. "Gabriel?" Her voice was a hoarse whisper. "I'm here," he said, taking her hand. "Don't move. The ambulance is on its way." She tried to speak again, but the pain was too much. Tears streamed from her eyes, mixing with the blood on her face. "It was him." The words came out in a thread of a voice. "Richard, he—" "Shh," Gabriel squeezed her hand. "Don't talk now. Save your strength." But Marina seemed determined to say what she needed to, as if she feared this might be her last chance. "The baby." Her free hand went to her belly. "Please, take care of—" "The baby's fine," Gabriel said, though he had no way of knowing. "You're fine. You're both going to be fine." Above them, on the 30th floor, chaos had erupted. Richard Montgomery stood on the balcony, his face as white as a sheet, surrounded by Beatrice and a few loyal executives. His mind was racing, trying to find an explanation, an out, a way to control the narrative before it spun completely out of his hands. "It was an accident," he said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "The floor was wet. She slipped." Beatrice nodded, already in damage control mode. "Of course. A tragic accident. She was emotionally unstable because of the pregnancy. Everyone noticed how distraught she seemed tonight." The executives around them agreed in silence, each of them owing Richard too many favors to contradict him. But not everyone was so willing to accept that version of events. Chloe Sanders, still clutching her phone with the recording of the scene, watched from a dark corner of the room. Her heart pounded as she considered her options. She held a bombshell that could destroy the most powerful man in the city. The question was, did she have the courage to light the fuse? On the ground floor, the ambulance finally arrived. The paramedics worked efficiently, immobilizing Marina on a backboard while performing an initial assessment of her injuries. "She's conscious," one of them reported to the other. "Multiple visible traumas, but vitals are stable. The baby seems okay, but we need an ultrasound ASAP." Gabriel refused to let go of Marina's hand as they loaded her into the ambulance. "I'm going with her." The paramedic hesitated. "Are you family, sir?" Gabriel looked at Marina, at those eyes he had never been able to forget, and spoke the only truth that mattered in that moment. "Yes, I'm family." The ambulance sped off with its sirens wailing, leaving behind a penthouse in an uproar, a ruined party, and a man who was beginning to realize that his carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down. Richard Montgomery watched the ambulance lights disappear into the streets of New York and felt, for the first time in his life, that control was slipping through his fingers. Beside him, Beatrice was on the phone with lawyers, PR reps, crisis management specialists, but he barely heard her. All he could think about was the look on Marina's face as she fell, and the words she had said just before everything fell apart. "This isn't a marriage, Richard. It's a prison." The night was just beginning, and with it, the greatest battle Richard Montgomery would ever face. Not for his empire or his fortune, but for his own version of the truth, and for the woman he still insisted on calling his. Lenox Hill Hospital was one of the most prestigious in New York, and the arrival of Marina Hayes Montgomery caused a quiet commotion among the medical staff. The wife of developer Richard Montgomery, 7 months pregnant, a victim of a 5-story fall. The news was already circulating through the halls before the ambulance even pulled up to the emergency entrance. Gabriel stayed by Marina's side the entire way, holding her hand as the paramedics monitored her vitals. She had drifted in and out of consciousness during the ride, murmuring disconnected words between moments of terrifying lucidity. When they finally wheeled her into the trauma bay, Gabriel was forced to wait outside. He paced the sterile hallway, his hands buried in his suit pockets, his mind filled with questions he couldn't answer. What had happened on that balcony? He had seen Richard holding Marina, had seen her trying to pull away. But then what? Had she jumped, slipped, or had she been pushed? The answer to that question would change everything. Back at the Upper East Side penthouse, the party had turned into an investigation scene. The police arrived within minutes, cordoning off the balcony and beginning to take statements. The guests, once so elegant and carefree, now looked like frightened birds trapped in a gilded cage, desperate to escape but held back by circumstance. Richard Montgomery was in his private study, a sanctuary of mahogany and leather that few were ever allowed to enter. Beatrice was with him, along with his personal attorney Henry Wallace, who had been woken up and rushed over as the situation escalated. "We need to get the story straight before—" "You talk to the police," Wallace said, a man in his 60s with shrewd eyes and a reputation for never losing a case. "What exactly happened on that balcony?" Richard ran his hands through his hair, a gesture that betrayed his anxiety despite the controlled expression on his face. "We argued. Marina was emotionally unstable. You know how pregnant women can get. She pulled away from me, hit the railing, and fell. It was an accident." "And you didn't touch her at any point?" The lawyer's question was clinical, devoid of judgment. Richard hesitated, and Beatrice noted the hesitation, with watchful eyes. "I held her arms at one point. I was trying to calm her down." "Are there witnesses?" "The glass door was closed," Beatrice interjected. "The guests were busy with the party. No one saw anything." But she was wrong. On the other side of the penthouse, in a dark corner where she had taken refuge to process what she had witnessed, Chloe Sanders still held her phone. The recording was shaky, partially obscured by the reflection on the glass, but it was clear enough to show Richard grabbing Marina trying to break free, and the fateful moment she backed into the railing. It wasn't definitive proof that he had pushed her, but it also wasn't proof that she had simply slipped. The young journalist knew she had a decision to make. She could turn the video over to the police and become the key witness in a scandal that would rock New York society. Or she could keep it, sell it to the highest bidder, or simply pretend she had seen nothing. As she weighed her options, she was approached by a middle-aged woman with a building staff ID badge. "Miss, the police are taking statements. From all the guests. Could you come with me, please?" Chloe hesitated for only a second before slipping the phone into the pocket of her dress. "Of course," she said. "I'm ready to tell them what I saw." At the hospital, the hours crawled by with torturous slowness. Gabriel had been informed that Marina was stable, that the baby seemed to have been unaffected by the fall thanks to a combination of factors: luck, the angle of impact, the hood of the car that had absorbed some of the shock. The hood of his own car, he realized with a shiver. His Mercedes had been parked directly below the balcony by sheer coincidence, or perhaps by something more than coincidence. If she had landed a few feet to the side on the bare concrete, the story could have been very different. When he was finally allowed into Marina's room, he found her awake but weak. Her face was covered in bruises, One arm was in a splint, and wires and monitors were connected to her body from every direction. But her eyes, when she saw him enter, shone with something he hadn't seen in 7 years. Recognition, relief, and something more. "You're here," she whispered, the words escaping like an answered prayer. Gabriel moved to the bed, pulling a chair up to sit beside her. "Where else would I be?" Marina closed her eyes for a moment, and a tear rolled down her bruised cheek. "I dreamed about you so many times," she said in a low voice. "I dreamed you would show up and get me out of that house, out of that life. And now you're here, and I don't know if this is real or if I'm hallucinating from the medication. It's real." Gabriel reached out and touched her hand with infinite gentleness. "I'm here, Marina, and I'm not going anywhere." For a long moment they sat in silence, connected only by the touch of their hands and the shared memory of all they could have been. "Why did you go to that party?" Marina finally asked. "Mrs. Wallace invited me. Insisted, actually." Gabriel paused, considering how much of the truth he should reveal. "I resisted for weeks. I knew you'd be there, and I didn't want to complicate your life." Marina let out a bitter laugh that turned into a grimace of pain. "My life was already complicated long before you showed up, Gabriel. What happened on that balcony?" The question slipped out before he could stop it. "What did Richard do to you?" Marina turned her face, looking toward the window where the city lights glowed like silent witnesses to all the secrets New York held. "Richard is—" she began, then stopped, searching for the right words. "Richard is a man who needs control, over his business, over his image, over everything around him. And I was part of that everything." "Did he hurt you?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy as lead. "Not in the way you're imagining," Marina answered slowly. "He never hit me, never left visible marks. What he did was more subtle than that. He would belittle me, isolate me, convince me that I was weak, incapable, that I needed him to survive." "Emotional abuse." Gabriel felt anger rise in his chest, but he kept his voice calm so as not to upset her. Marina nodded. "I didn't see it at first. He was so charming when we met, so attentive. It took me years to understand that the affection was just a way to trap me. And by the time I realized—" her voice broke. "By the time I realized I was already so tangled in his web that I didn't know how to escape." Gabriel squeezed her hand tighter. "And the baby." Something changed in Marina's face at the mention of her child. A soft, maternal light that contrasted with the physical pain surrounding her. "The baby was my salvation and my prison at the same time," she said. "When I found out I was pregnant, I knew I couldn't live like that anymore. Not for me, but for him. My son deserved more than a broken—" "Mother? You were going to leave Richard?" "I was planning to. I've been gathering documents for months, talking quietly with lawyers. Richard doesn't know, or at least he didn't." Marina closed her eyes, exhausted. "But tonight, on the balcony, I said things I shouldn't have. I called our marriage a prison. I told him he scared me. And he lost control." "Did you fall, or did he push you?" The question hung in the air for long seconds. When Marina finally opened her eyes, there was genuine confusion in them. "I don't know," she admitted. "It all happened so fast. I remember him lunging at me, trying to back away, my back hitting the railing. Then I just remember falling." Before Gabriel could respond, the door to the room opened and a nurse came in, followed by a man in a suit who flashed a police badge. "Mrs. Montgomery, I'm Detective Anthony Fisher," the man said in a tone that tried to be gentle but couldn't hide the urgency behind his words. "I need to ask you a few questions about what happened tonight, if you're up to it." Gabriel stood up immediately. "She just survived a 5-story fall. Can't this wait?" The detective looked at him with professional curiosity. "And you are?" "Gabriel Anderson," Marina answered before he could speak. "He's my—" She hesitated, searching for the right word. "He's my friend." Something in the way she said friend made the detective raise an eyebrow, but he didn't comment. He just stepped forward and pulled a notepad from his pocket. "Mrs. Montgomery, your husband claims you slipped on the wet floor of the balcony. Is that your version of events? Marina looked at Gabriel, then at the detective, and finally at her own hands, resting on the belly where her baby still grew, still fought, still survived against all odds. No, she said finally, her voice small but firm. That's not what happened. Across town, in the penthouse that now felt more like a crime scene than a party venue, Beatrice Foster was on the verge of a breakdown. The police had finished taking statements, but instead of leaving, they had requested access to the building's security footage. And that's where things started to get complicated. The head of security, a burly man named Steve, had been ordered by Richard to delete any footage from the balcony. But when he tried to execute the command, he found the system had been remotely locked. Mr. Oswald, the building manager, a meticulous 70-year-old who had worked in the building since it opened, appeared in the office with an unreadable expression on his face. The recordings can't be deleted, he informed them bluntly. All security files are automatically backed up to an off-site server per building protocol, and any deletion attempt is logged in the system. Richard's face went visibly pale. Oswald, I'm sure we can come to an arrangement. No, Mr. Montgomery. The old manager held up a hand, cutting him off. I've worked in this building for 40 years. I've seen everything happen within these walls, but never in my entire career have I been an accomplice to obstruction of justice, and I don't intend to start now. Beatrice intervened, trying to use her usual charm. Mr. Oswald, please, think of the building's reputation, the other residents. I'm thinking of exactly that, Miss Foster. Mr. Oswald turned to the detective, who had quietly appeared at the office door. Detective, the recordings you need are available and secure. I can arrange for immediate access. The detective nodded, an almost imperceptible smile crossing his lips. I appreciate your cooperation, Mr. Oswald. Mr. Montgomery, he turned to Richard with a harder expression, I suggest you don't leave town for the next few days. We may need to speak with you again. Richard opened his mouth to protest, but his lawyer placed a hand on his shoulder, silencing him. My client is entirely at the disposal of the authorities, Henry Wallace said, with a professionalism that contrasted with the panic in his eyes. When the police finally left, taking the recordings and statements with them, the silence that fell over the penthouse was deafening. The party had ended hours ago, the guests scattered like leaves in the wind, each carrying fragments of what they had witnessed. Richard Montgomery, the man who had always controlled everything around him, found himself for the first time completely powerless. His wife was in a hospital giving her own statement. Her ex-fiancé was by her side, occupying a place that should have been his. And somewhere in the city, recordings and witnesses were telling a story he could no longer rewrite. Beatrice approached him, placing a hand on his arm. We can still control this, Richard. We have resources, we have allies. He shrugged her off harshly. Control? Did you see that old man's face when he came in here? He's already decided I'm guilty. Everyone has. Then we'll prove them wrong, Beatrice insisted, a note of desperation creeping into her voice. You built an empire from nothing, Richard. You've overcome obstacles that would have destroyed anyone else. This is just another battle. Richard turned to her, and for the first time, Beatrice saw something in his eyes that frightened her. It wasn't anger or fear. It was something deeper. Something that looked almost like regret. You don't understand, he said in a low voice. For the first time in my life, I don't know how to win this. Because for the first time, Beatrice, I don't know if I deserve to. The December night continued outside, the stars shining on, indifferent to the human dramas unfolding beneath them. In a hospital across town, a woman was beginning to tell her truth. In a luxury penthouse, a man was beginning to face the consequences of his choices. And somewhere between them, the truth was fighting its way to the surface, as it always did, no matter how many lies tried to drown it. The dawn would bring new revelations, but for now New York slept, holding its secrets until the light of day tore them from their hiding places. The morning of December 26th dawned over New York with a clarity that seemed ironic given everything that had happened the night before. The sun shone mercilessly on the skyscrapers, indifferent to the broken hearts, shattered masks, and truths that were finally coming to light. At Lenox Hill Hospital, Marina had spent a restless night, caught between moments of drug-induced sleep and sudden awakenings from nightmares that replayed the fall endlessly. But when she finally opened her eyes and saw Gabriel asleep in the chair by her bed, still holding her hand, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. The doctors had confirmed what seemed impossible. Both she and the baby had survived without serious long-term damage. Marina had a fractured arm, cracked ribs, and bruises all over her body, but nothing that time and proper care couldn't heal. And her son, protected by the amniotic fluid and the way she had landed, continued to grow strong in her womb. It was a miracle, the nurses said. A divine grace, some visitors claimed. Marina didn't know what it was. She only knew she had been given a second chance, and she wouldn't waste it. Gabriel woke as she stirred, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that needed no words. "Good morning," he said, his voice hoarse with sleep. "Good morning," Marina replied, and for the first time in years, the smile on her lips was genuine. They sat in silence for a few moments, absorbing the reality of being there together, after so many years and so many twists of fate. There was so much to be said, so much to explain, so many wounds to heal, but in that moment the simple presence of one another was enough. The silence was broken by the arrival of Detective Fisher, who knocked before entering. His face held an expression Marina couldn't immediately decipher. "Mrs. Montgomery, I need to update you on some new developments in the investigation. May I come in?" Marina nodded, squeezing Gabriel's hand. "Can he stay?" The detective glanced at Gabriel, sizing him up for a moment before agreeing. "We've analyzed the building's security footage," he began, sitting in a nearby chair. "And we also received a video recorded by one of the party guests." Marina felt her heart race. "What do the recordings show?" The detective sighed. "They show Mr. Montgomery holding you by the arms. They show you trying to pull away. They show a heated argument, although the audio isn't clear enough to make out the words. And they show—" He paused. "They show you hitting the balcony railing and falling." "Did he push me?" The question escaped before Marina could stop it. The detective shook his head slowly. "That's where things get complicated, ma'am. The guest's video shows Mr. Montgomery reaching his hands toward you at the moment you backed away and fell, but it's unclear if he was trying to push you or catch you. So there's no way to prove anything," Gabriel said, frustration clear in his voice. "Not necessarily." The detective opened a folder he was carrying. "Besides the recordings, we have statements from several witnesses who observed Mr. Montgomery's behavior during the party, including a particularly detailed statement from a Mrs. Helen Peterson." "Mrs. Peterson," Marina murmured, her eyes filling with tears. "She described a pattern of controlling and emotionally abusive behavior you allegedly suffered throughout the marriage. And she's not the only one. Other people have come forward with similar stories. Household staff, former employees of Mr. Montgomery's companies, even some social acquaintances." Marina felt a mixture of relief and shame. Relief because her truth was finally being heard. Shame because that truth had been so obvious to others while she herself struggled to acknowledge it. "What happens now?" Gabriel asked. "Right now, Mr. Montgomery is being formally questioned. The charges will depend on how you wish to proceed. There could be a case for assault, attempted battery, or we could frame it as an accident caused by negligence. The final decision will be up to the DA's office, but your testimony will be crucial." Marina closed her eyes, letting the information sink in. For years, she had feared Richard's power, his ability to manipulate situations, to make people believe whatever version of reality he chose to present. But now, for the first time, that power was being challenged. "I want the truth to come out," she said finally. "Not for revenge, but because other women need to know they're not alone. That behavior like Richard's has consequences." The detective nodded respectfully. "Understood, ma'am. We'll keep you informed of the case's progress." After he left, Marina and Gabriel sat in silence again. There was so much to process, so many conflicting emotions vying for attention. "Are you okay?" Gabriel asked softly. "I don't know," Marina admitted. "I'm relieved, scared, exhausted, and strangely free all at the same time. Does that make sense?" Gabriel smiled, that smile she remembered from 7 years ago, the smile that had made her fall in love with him in the first place. It makes all the sense in the world. At the Upper East Side penthouse, Richard Montgomery was facing the storm he had created. The police had spent the night searching his offices, seizing documents and electronic devices. His lawyer was in emergency meetings with prosecutors, and Beatrice, the woman he thought he could count on in any circumstance, was strangely silent. The truth was, Beatrice was facing her own crisis. The rumors about her relationship with Richard had exploded on social media, fueled by catty comments from party guests who had never liked her. Her position at the company was threatened, her reputation was in tatters, and the lies she had told to protect Richard were starting to turn on her. "You promised me we would get married," she said to Richard during a tense conversation in his study. "You said you would divorce Marina as soon as the baby was born. That was the plan, wasn't it?" Richard looked at her with empty eyes. "Did you really believe that?" The pain on Beatrice's face was almost physical. "I destroyed my career for you, Richard. I lied. I manipulated. I did things I'm not proud of. And you're telling me it was all for nothing." He turned away, walking to the window overlooking the city. The same city that had admired him yesterday and was judging him today. "I never promised you anything, Beatrice. You heard what you wanted to hear." The silence that followed was heavy with decades of unspoken bitterness. Beatrice had always known, deep down, that Richard would never see her as an equal. She was useful, convenient, available. But she would never be the wife, never be the mother of his children, never be the woman he proudly showed off at parties like that one. Marina had taken that place, and Beatrice hated her for it with an intensity that scared her. "I could tell them everything I know about you," she said, her voice trembling with restrained anger. "About the bribes, the threats, about all the times you used your power to destroy people who dared to challenge you." Richard turned to her, and for a moment there was something like fear in his eyes. "You wouldn't do that. You'd be destroying yourself along with me." "Maybe I don't care anymore." Beatrice stood up, gathering her things. "Maybe being free of you is worth any price." She walked out of the study without looking back, leaving Richard alone with his choices and their consequences. The days that followed were a whirlwind of events. The story of Marina and Richard dominated the news, evolving from a tragic accident into a national conversation about domestic abuse, power dynamics, and the masks society accepts in the name of appearances. Witnesses continued to come forward, each adding a piece to the puzzle of the real Richard Montgomery. Former female employees who had been silenced with financial settlements, business partners who had been intimidated, women who had crossed his path and carried emotional scars they had never dared to show. The press called it the scandal of the year. For Marina, it was simply the truth finally being told. At the hospital, she had constant visitors. Mrs. Peterson came every day, bringing flowers and words of encouragement. Chloe Saunders, the journalist who had recorded the crucial video, asked for permission to tell Marina's story in a special report, promising to give a voice to victims of abuse who had been silenced for too long. And Gabriel was always there, a constant presence that Marina was beginning to depend on in ways that both scared and comforted her. "We need to talk," she said to him one sunny afternoon when she was strong enough to sit up in bed without help. "About us, about what happened 7 years ago." Gabriel nodded, bracing himself for a conversation they had both been avoiding for days. "I'm listening." Marina took a deep breath. "I loved you, Gabriel. I loved you more than anything I had ever felt in my life. And when Richard came along, She paused, searching for the right words. "I didn't choose him because he was better than you. I chose him because he promised me a life I thought I wanted. Security, stability, a position in society, things that at the time seemed important. And now? Now I know they were just illusions." Marina touched her belly, feeling the baby move. "I spent 7 years in a gilded cage, Gabriel, and the only thing I learned is that no amount of gold is worth the freedom to be who you really are." Gabriel took her hand, his eyes shining with emotions he didn't try to hide. "I never forgot you, Marina. In all these years, in all the countries I visited, in all the women I met, I could never forget you. You were the standard by which I measured everything and everyone. and everyone always fell short. Marina felt tears stream down her face. I didn't forget you either. Even in the worst moments with Richard, I would dream about you. I'd dream about the life we could have had. We can have it now, Gabriel said simply. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be like we imagined 7 years ago. But it can be real. It can be ours. And the baby? Marina asked, the fear plain in her voice. He's Richard's son. Could you love his child? Gabriel stood up and sat on the edge of the bed, taking Marina's face in his hands with infinite gentleness. This baby is yours, he said firmly. He's growing inside you, nourished by your love, protected by your courage. It doesn't matter who contributed biologically to his existence. What matters is who will love him, raise him, teach him to be a better person than any of us ever were. And if you'll let me, I want to be that person, by your side. Marina sobbed, years of pain and loneliness finally finding a release. Are you serious? I've never been more serious in my life. They hugged, carefully because of her injuries, but with an intensity that required no physical strength. It was the embrace of two souls who had been lost and found each other again, against all odds, through every storm. A few weeks later, Marina was discharged from the hospital. The penthouse on the Upper East Side was sold, along with everything it represented. Richard faced multiple lawsuits, his reputation destroyed, his empire crumbling under the weight of the revelations that continued to emerge. Beatrice had become a witness for the prosecution, trading her silence for immunity, and perhaps a chance to rebuild her life away from Richard's shadow. Marina chose not to follow the media circus. Instead, she moved to a simple house on the Connecticut coast, in Westport, where the sound of the waves replaced the noise of traffic and where she could finally breathe without feeling the weight of others' expectations. Gabriel visited her every weekend, making the drive from New York with the same devotion with which he had waited for her for 7 years. And one summer afternoon, with the sun setting over the ocean and Marina's belly ready to give birth, he finally asked the question they both knew was coming. Marry me, he said simply. Not because I want to save you or protect you, but because I want to walk beside you as equals for the rest of our lives. Marina looked at the horizon, where the sky met the sea in an explosion of colors no painting could ever capture. She thought about everything she had been through, all the pain and all the lessons, and for the first time she allowed herself to believe that the future could be different from the past. Yes, she said, turning to him with a smile that lit up her face like the sun disappearing over the horizon. Yes, I'll marry you. They kissed as the first stars appeared in the sky, silent witnesses to a new beginning born from the ashes of an ending. 2 weeks later, Marina gave birth to a healthy baby boy with dark eyes like hers and a strong cry that echoed through the maternity ward like a declaration of life. She named him Lucas, which meant bearer of light, because that's what he represented to her, the light at the end of the darkest tunnel she had ever walked through. Gabriel was by her side through the entire delivery, holding her hand, murmuring words of encouragement, crying with her when the baby was finally born. And when little Lucas was placed in Marina's arms, Gabriel looked at the scene and knew with a certainty that transcended logic that this was his family, not by blood, but by choice. And choices, he had learned, were more powerful than any biological tie. Marina's story continued to be told in the months and years that followed. She became a voice for women who had suffered in silence, participating in awareness campaigns and helping to create support networks for victims of emotional abuse. Her experience, transformed into strength, helped countless others find the courage to leave their own tormentors. Richard Montgomery disappeared from public life, his crimes exposed, his power undone. Some said he had moved to another country. Others claimed he lived as a recluse on some rural estate, hiding from the eyes of a society he had so thoroughly despised. Marina didn't care. For the first time in her life, he was just a memory, not a threat. And in a beach house in Westport, a family grew. Marina, Gabriel, and little Lucas built a life made of simple moments: breakfast with an ocean view, walks along the sand at dusk, nights of laughter and stories told by candlelight when the power went out. It wasn't the life of luxury Marina had once thought she wanted. It was something much better. It was a life of truth, authenticity, and unconditional love. The fall of the masks, as the press had called the scandal, was over. But Marina's rebirth was just beginning, and she knew with every fiber of her being that it had been worth every scar, every tear, every moment of despair, because in the end the truth always finds a way, and freedom once won is the greatest treasure anyone can possess.